Welcome to the Small Business Sessions podcast from Enterprise Nation's Business Connected training program and our partners Vodafone Business, Constant Contact, Dropbox and JP Morgan. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Steve Folland, a freelance podcaster and video editor. With a long career in radio, Steve went freelance in 2013 and hasn't looked back. Alongside his work creating videos and podcasts for other people, he launched his own show, Being Freelance, in January 2015, followed by the Being Freelance vlog in 2016. Steve, who has been using Dropbox since 2013, is also the co-host of Doing It for the Kids, a podcast for freelance parents, which won gold for Best Business Podcast at the British Podcast Awards. In the show, we discuss Steve's freelance adventures, his tips for succeeding as a freelancer, the tech tools that have been key to his career, and his thoughts on the impact of AI in the creative sector. So, Steve, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So, take me back to where it all began. You're a freelancer. You're also a podcaster. So, for me, as a freelancer and a podcast, this one is quite personal. But do you want to take me back to where did your freelance journey start?
Yeah, so I worked in radio for years. That's what I always wanted to do. And I started freelancing. I was working at like quite a small independent station, and I started freelancing on the side of that, mainly for creative reasons, because I thought I work at quite a small place. I'd rather freelance at big, like national stations and stuff like that. So that's how I started freelancing. But then once we had kids, we were like, actually could do with some more money. So that's when the freelancing, it became a bit more of a necessity. So then that was around 2009. So it was also the same sort of time that people started needing video to go on their websites. And I edit podcasts, but I knew how to do video. So that's what I started doing. I started using all the different skills I had of scripting, voiceovers, making videos, presenting videos, all sorts of things as much as I could. And then I had so much work on the side that I was like maybe going to bed at midnight, getting up at 4 a.m. It was all a bit silly. And at the same time, it was like, now we have a second child. Who the heck's going to look after them? Like, how are we going to make that work? Who's going to drop them off and pick them up and things like that? So I decided to go freelance so that I could, full-time freelance that is, so that I could have that flexibility to take care of the family and work around it at the same time.
Yeah, that's very common, but you're right. You kind of grew naturally into it as you needed it in your personal life. So do you want to talk a bit about how that has led to the courses and the community that you've ended up building around your freelance work?
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of led out of the fact that I had no idea what I was doing. So I started trying to find podcasts around 2013, something like that, about freelancing. And it seems hard to imagine it now, but there weren't any. Like there was a few where freelancers might talk about graphic design or web design or whatever, but not about actual freelancing. It was all about, it was mainly American entrepreneurs. That was kind of the thing. So since I had a background in radio, I already had a microphone. I thought, well, maybe I'll start one. So I started interviewing different freelancers, trying to learn from them all around the world, recording it online. And that was 2015, so like 10 years ago. And gradually off the back of that, I started doing a vlog. I started a Facebook group, and like there were thousands of freelancers all from around the world. And from that, grew this community and a course for new freelancers and all sorts. So it all came out of trying to learn and meet other freelancers or hear their experiences myself.
I mean, there's a lot of businesses that want whatever they're doing, product or service, they're keen to build a community around their business. So can you kind of pinpoint how you did it and what advice you'd give to other small business owners that are looking to do that?
Yeah. I mean, how I did it was having that podcast, so having an audience and realizing that they were reaching out and talking to me and thinking, wouldn't it be great if they could all talk to each other? And of course, they all have something in common because they're all freelancers and they all want to chat about that, discuss ideas, cheer each other on, all of that sort of thing. So I think you have to have that common ground to build a community. So not all products and services have that, but a lot do. Like when you had your yoga guest on a few weeks back or whatever, like there's an obvious thing which is going to run through all of her customers. And so you can form a community. So I had that because I fear that in some ways community is becoming a bit of a business buzzword. And the trouble is it's actually a lot of effort. Like, it's hard to do. So you can end up screaming into a void and nobody actually wants to talk to each other. So I think if you try to start a community and it isn't happening, maybe you need to think about why that is. Maybe a lot of these things which say, oh, we have a community, they're not really. They're like an audience or they're a following. And there's a big difference between what those things are. So if I was to give advice, it would probably be, do you really want to start a community? Because there's nothing wrong with having an audience or a following, broadcasting to an email list. But if you do have this thing which can bring people together and you can think you can start conversations between them, then it is incredibly powerful. But it takes a lot of effort to bring those people together.
Yeah, you mentioned the other Kat, who is also on this podcast. Scroll back to listen. But she said a great quote, "The community nourishes my brand." And she was talking a lot about how, they kind of supported her. They helped to make decisions. Have you had that with yours? Do you find that they know who you are, so that are they quite kind of supportive of you as the kind of head of the community, as it were?
Yeah, I think the community, when you start a community, it kind of will take on your characteristics to a certain extent. So it's like how you behave in it, how you are, will filter down. Like, it will attract those sort of people and it will push away people who think, oh, who's this idiot with his brightly coloured shoes, that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
But hey, you should be watching the YouTube version if you're only listening. But yeah, it becomes, particularly with what we do in the Being Freelance community, because we're all so isolated, we do get to know each other really well. And we do like virtual co-working, we do online meetups like Tea Break Social type stuff, and in-person meetups as well. And that's when you all really start to connect and the community starts to take on a personality of its own beyond me. It becomes the Being Freelance community. People in it are BFFs, they're Being Freelance friends, and they look out for each other. And I think, I like to think that if I were to disappear, somebody would step up and keep that going. To, like, even when I go on holiday and I was going to say, oh, well, I can't do the co-working, somebody stepped up and went, well, I'll host it if you want. So they could all still carry on. So I think after a while in your community, you can start to maybe think of, who are potential leaders or potential facilitators within that, so that it becomes more than just yourself.
That's a brilliant tip. Back onto kind of general freelance experiences, what would you say have been the key benefits and challenges you faced as a freelancer in the creative sector?
Well, a lot of it comes down to doing the work, but I guess all that time when you're not doing the work. So all the marketing, all the admin, all the different roles that you have on. So a lot of us become creative freelancers in particular because we love doing something, but you also have to almost learn to love all the other stuff that kind of goes around it. I think there's also a challenge of the isolation. Like, I worked from home for years and there wasn't a community. I worked from home. Yeah, I recorded the podcast, but really I was just speaking to parents at the school gates or the nursery drop-off about the most mundane things. And it was only when I started going to a co-work space that I realized what a difference all those tiny micro conversations you have, even like they seem so spurious about, TV or how you doing, all of it. But it's all these little things. And I hadn't realized how withdrawn I've become, how sort of, I don't want to say antisocial, but yeah, it can kind of happen to you without realizing that everything's on you. All the worries about your business are on you because there's nobody to talk to it about. you've got a family, but if they're not in business, then they don't probably get it. So to find people who get it is really important. So these days, obviously, you can go and find your community. And there's obviously I do the Being Freelance community, but there's also lots of niche ones. So it might be a copywriters community, or graphic designers community, or whatever, or freelancers who love snowboarding community.
Right. Yeah.
They do exist. They do snow working instead of co-working, and just go off.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Wow. What, as they snowboard? Or?
Yeah, genuinely.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, I that's one of the hardest things. I hear it again and again on the Being Freelance podcast, is that isolation that people hear.
Yeah.
But these days, there's no real reason to have that, I don't think.
No. And obviously Enterprise Nation is
right.
Which,
you know.
And this is, this has kind of come out of this, that our podcast kind of came out of the community. Actually, we kind of did it the other way around.
Yes.
We had a community for a while and then added a podcast, and that's led to more. What about pricing? Now, pricing is such a big thing. I know I went freelance 4 years ago, and I was immediately like, what do I charge? And then I'd go on calls and I'd say a price, wish I hadn't said it, if they accepted it immediately, all that kind of stuff. So what have you done, and what's your advice for pricing for freelancers for services?
I mean, you could do a whole podcast. Well, in fact, you could do it. There's so much nuance to it. But what I've come to realize is that a lot changes when you recognize that you're a business as a freelancer. And when you think about businesses, they think about their overheads when they're figuring out their pricing. So every little overhead, it might be your insurance, all your business subscriptions, the computers, like everything. And then they think about their capacity, like how much can they work? How long can that store stay open? How much stuff can they create every day, and so on? And as a freelancer, you have to think, well, I'm just one person, so also I have to take time off, or I might be sick. And so that becomes part of your capacity. Businesses, where it gets interesting, though, is when you start to realize they have marketing departments and they have research and development needs. They take care of their people, not just now, but like they might do private healthcare, or they might put money in a pension. And all of those things, it's on you as a business, as a freelance business, to take care of all of those things. And that's when you can start to shift away from what happens to a lot of people, which is where they think, well, I earned this an hour, or I earned this a month, or this a year, so that's a good starting point. It's not really, because you got to make sure that you're not losing money. And better than that, you're saving for a rainy day and you're saving for your future. So there's a lot to take in. But if you start to think of yourself as a business, that's a good starting point, I think.
That's a really good point. Yeah, you're right. Because some freelancers are, I'm just a little freelancer. I'm not a business owner.
Yeah.
So I suppose there is that kind of split sometimes, isn't there? Small business owners and freelancers. Some don't see them as the same thing, but you're right. Ultimately, it is the same, isn't it? Yeah. And so, what about winning clients then? It's obviously a similar question, but what advice would you give to other freelancers on getting clients and retaining them as well?
Yeah, a lot of it. You see, when I ask people, like, where do you get your clients from on the Being Freelance podcast? So much of it comes from word of mouth. And so you have to start to think, well, how can I get word of mouth? So one of those ways is just by meeting more people. So actually going to events, talking to people in your co-work space if you go to one, so that they know what you do. Like hanging out within the Enterprise Nation community, for example, or the Being Freelance community. Like it's the more people who know who you are and what you do. So you've got to show up, and you've also got to say what it is that you do, who you are. Like talk about it. And as part of that, you'll start to make friends. You'll start to get to know people. It might be in your local community. You might go to local events where you might be the only person who's, let's say, a graphic designer. And so people inherently want to help each other. So if that person who just met you is, next time they hear somebody who wants a graphic designer or who has a shoddy looking advert, they're going to go, oh, I know, you should talk to this person. I know a graphic designer. I know a podcast editor or whatever. So part of it is doing a good job so that the people want to come back to you and they want to tell other people, oh yeah, I hired that person. But people ultimately itself is the key. Like the more people you know, the more it'll come back to you.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like formal networking, does it? It's just conversations. It's not like that kind of pitching for a minute, exchanging your business card, which also does help, obviously, but isn't for everyone.
Yeah, and I think it puts a lot of people off. I think it scares people, that idea of that sort of networking. There's so many different types of events and learning things that you can go to now. And the ability to stay in touch on something like LinkedIn, for example, so that you can comment on their stuff, or they might see you talking about what you're up to just on the periphery of their vision until they need you. Things like that. Network isn't exactly what it used to be, or that we've been led to believe on TV.
You don't have to go to a golf club at 6 a.m. and no.
Have you done that though? Oh man,
I have done that. For some that works. I mean, a certain type of business, but you're right. I also run a little meetup as part of Enterprise Nation, and we tend to get, and I have a kind of, it's not pitching, it's just talk about what you want to talk about, and you might promote yourself in that conversation. But we find I get a lot of people who have been put off and never done it and think, oh, it isn't all about that then. Yeah, so it is finding your community and using it to your advantage. It's going back a bit, but actually on your podcast, and obviously I find this particularly useful. How do you promote it? How do you get listens? I mean, we get listens and we get loads, but I mean, you've been doing it a while, and back then, I guess has it changed quite a bit since when you started doing it 10 years ago to, obviously there's a lot of podcasts around nowadays.
Yeah. I think it's one of the big things. If you start a podcast, actually the recording of it, the editing of it, that's like the easy bit, effectively. It's the fun bit. It's the constant promoting of it. You've got to tell people that it exists. Even the people who already listen to you, you've got to keep sending them reminders, little signals on social media, but there's a new episode. That's why video clips are so helpful. But I think podcasts are like gold mines of other content. So they actually feed the roots of the content marketing machine. They don't really have roots. That's more like a plant, a blooming plant. But yeah, you can dig into a podcast and off the back of it create so many emails or blog posts or other video content. You could take lots of your past episodes of Enterprise Nation, right? You could take all of your old podcasts that you've done and start to create new podcasts by bringing together clips that past guests have said. And suddenly you've got new content you could be sharing on socials and so on. But yeah, it's tricky because all of those things are trying to draw people towards a podcast. But actually, one of the best things I guess you could do to grow a podcast is be a guest on other podcasts, a bit like I'm doing.
There you go.
Because it puts you in front of other people's audiences who clearly already like podcasts.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So you could appear on other people's podcasts, and in doing so, this podcast will get a little mention, it'll get links through. And if people have enjoyed listening to you and their stories, then they're more likely to go and listen to you. So actually, that is probably the biggest tip that I could give people with a podcast trying to grow it, is put yourself in front of other people's audiences.
Big thanks to Vodafone Business for sponsoring this podcast. VHub from Vodafone Business has supported over 1 million SMEs, providing expert advice on a range of topics that matter to small business owners everywhere. Access VHub for a free one-to-one consultation with an expert advisor and get support tailored to your business. Book your free consultation with a VHub advisor today. Find more details at vodafone.co.uk/VHub. What about tech tools that you've used? What key tech tools have been key to your freelance career through the years?
I think when I first got, what would you call it? Like accounting software, that was a big moment. Because when I was saying about treating yourself like a business and that shift in mindset, that was a big moment for me, because suddenly, it makes it all much more efficient, but it also makes you feel like you're a business. You see everything so much easier. It's so much easier to send invoices and reconcile your bank statements and all of that. know how much you're going to be owing in tax. Huge things, all that come out of those sort of software. Another one, which actually, I was using it before I went full-time freelance, was Dropbox, which is so integral to my business, partly because it doesn't even feel like an app because it sits on your computer and it's just part of your file operating system. But when I think about everything I do, every client I've had, and there's a lot over 10 years, and because I work in video and audio, there's a lot of files. They all have their own folders, it's all safely stored away. I've gone through multiple computers over 10 years, but it's all one Dropbox. So they're all stored in the cloud. They all just sync naturally across whatever devices I'm on. Even if I'm out and about and a client says they need a file, I can just go on the Dropbox app on my phone and send them a link to download it. I use so many. They have all these little functions that they've developed over the years. They have this thing called Get Files. Don't know if you've used that one. It's so if you need a client to, it's useful for me. I might want their podcast files if I'm just editing their podcast. I send them this link, so it's a folder, and I right click or whatever, and I say Get Files, and I send them that link. So to them, all they have to do is drag and drop their files into a web browser, and it turns up on my computer. I don't have to download it. I don't have to then put it in the right folder. It's just there. So little things like that are time efficient for me, but they're also a good experience for your client. So it makes you look good. They have a thing called Dropbox Replay, I think it's called. That's where I can use video or audio. You can send your client a link and they can leave comments directly on the video or the audio. So when it's particularly when I'm starting out on a brand new podcast series and we're still developing the sound, I can send those links to a producer and they can leave comments within that file. It just speeds everything up. I think if you were doing video, it even links back into Final Cut or Premiere or DaVinci Resolve or whatever. So there's loads of tools actually, frankly, that Dropbox don't talk about much, but are hidden gems, if the tools which years ago I would have used other tools to do, you can do screen capture, you can get contract signed, all of these passwords, it's all kind of wrapped up in there.
And that is so useful in it because, now there's so many options, but to have everything in one thing where you've got to log in once and it's all there, that is a massive benefit, isn't it? Rather than, logging into so many different other software.
But I think there's also thinking about that. It's why every year I try to reflect on all of my It's very easy to end up with loads of tool subscriptions. So it's worth looking back each year and thinking, am I still using that thing? Are there other options available? Is there a different plan? Some of these tools develop different plans across the year, which might suit you better and they don't tell you about it. Has something like Dropbox developed a tool which I'm already paying for somewhere else? Am I paying for video conferencing with one program when in fact it's already embedded in another one I'm signed up to, and so on? So I think you put your finances hat on as a freelancer and think, okay, where are all my subscriptions and am I actually using all of these? Can I drop down a tier? Can I ditch it? Have they added a suite of tools which renders a load of other ones insignificant?
No, that's a really good point. It's good to do that in it regularly because it's easy for that all to just happen and you've kind of not noticed. Yeah. So obviously one of the big things in the creative sector and every sector, but in the creative sector particularly, AI. So, what are your thoughts on the future of AI and its impact on our industry?
Oh, it's mixed.
That could be a whole episode.
There are some really good AI-based tools, and in fact, loads of them have been around for years, but they just didn't even call it AI. And if they can make you more efficient when you're effectively a company of one, or even if you're listening to this and you've got a small team, using those tools to make you more efficient, we all have to do our own marketing. And if you can create one social media graphic, click a button and it will multiply them into all the different formats, that's a great tool. Also, within podcasting and video, there's certain tools which can help you clean up audio, which in the past would have been obsolete. So those are great tools. Freelancers, in my experiences anyway, are really good at seeing new tools, experimenting with them early, and then finding a good way to use them. And I think that's what we're best off doing, is trying all of these different things, seeing how they can make us more efficient. How can we get to doing the more creative stuff that we love doing better? So can they help us in our finances, in our marketing and all of that?
Yeah. I think I've kind of started to do that. I use it to make me more efficient, because often a lot of writers say it can be a good start. If you're sort of writer's block, start of a blog post, you want a kind of opening to get you going, and transcribing interviews and stuff, the tools that are out there for that but again, it might not quite record what you think, and particularly if you rely on the, when it gives you the sort of summary of the transcript. But the transcription things are amazing, none of that shorthand required nowadays. Although I did spot a thing on social media, a newspaper journalist was saying, oh, no, we still need shorthand legally. Our notes, legally,
that's a good point.
Legally, they have to be in shorthand for court cases.
Yeah.
So I don't do that, though. Are there any, in your community or elsewhere, any other freelancers that kind of inspire you? Some of the people that you've is it probably a lot? I
was going to say, you're like making me pick favourites now.
Yeah. Don't have to name any of your favourites. Give me your top 5.
I mean, there are loads. I mean, one of them I ended up teaming up with is Frankie Tortora. She's a graphic designer, and we ended up collaborating on the Doing It for the Kids podcast, which is for self-employed parents. So we've been doing that for about 5 years now. She runs her own community as well, Doing It for the Kids community. But yeah, she's somebody where we really got to know each other through social media, and then became friends, and then started collaborating and stuff like that. So that's brilliant. But there are so many really great freelancers that I'm blessed with knowing, who inspire me all the time. And lots of them I talk to for the podcast as well.
That Doing It for the Kids, that's another great example of a niche. It's a freelance podcast, but for self-employed parents. It's like a niche within a niche within a niche.
Yeah. As a freelancer myself, I've never particularly niched, but when you're doing a podcast, it is brilliant because, it means you don't need a massive audience to make a difference. And actually, if you were thinking of selling adverts or something like that, not that I think that's the be and all end all with podcasts, but to have a niche audience, ones that really involved and following, and you know exactly who they are, that's really valuable to an audience. To businesses who are advertising on a podcast.
Yeah, of course.
Because you know exactly who they are, better than you could have an entertainment podcast with millions of listeners, but you don't. They're everyone. So really, all you can sell them is everyone products. But if you've got like a podcast just for freelance parents, then you can sell them a really specific tool that will help them.
That's a really good point. And just finally, what are your plans for the future, and what do you think of the future of freelancing, in this country?
My plans, one of the things I like about freelancing is the fact that I'm never quite sure what
that's true
my future is.
Yeah.
You have to kind of trust that there'll be something around the corner. But I always like the fact that I don't quite know what that is. I like the fact that I only have a few sort of ongoing projects and things. So, yeah, I like the fact that there might be somebody listening to this who goes, oh, I need somebody to edit a video or...
That's true.
Or model some badly fitting jeans. There's my guy.
For those watching on YouTube.
But yeah, so that's exciting. But actually, I never meant to grow being freelance as a business. I started it purely, including the community, from a sort of a philanthropic help myself, help others kind of point of view, which is no bad reason to start a business, really. But I have come to realize that treating it like a business means I can actually help more people because I can put more energy into it. And I really enjoy what I'm doing with the Being Freelance community. So I'm excited as to where that can go as more and more freelancers join. The people come up to me from or reach out to me from around the world who have gone into freelancing because they heard about it on that podcast. They listened to it and now they're joining the community. And that's already exciting. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where that ends up going.
That's brilliant. Well, Steve, I've loved this, talking to a fellow freelancer. How could I not love it? But Steve, thank you so much for joining us on the Small Business Sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've been watching Enterprise Nation's Small Business Sessions podcast, powered by Business Connected and our partners Vodafone Business, Constant Contact, Dropbox and JP Morgan. If you've been inspired during this episode, head to enterprisenation.com/business connected to register for webinars and to access free business training. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time.